Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. And this is going to be my mid-year book freakout tag. I realised that I'm incredibly late to the party, however I wrote down all of my answers before July hit, so all of them would have been with the books that I read prior to the start of the second half of the year, and I'd just like to have this record for myself. So I'm going to get into it. A couple of these questions are, well, most of these questions are going to be from the original tag that was created, and from other people doing this tag and adding their own questions, I've picked and chosen which of those other questions I would like to add in here. So I think this particular question was added by Books and Lala, but how many books have you read so far this year? And as of the end of June, I'd read 120 books, which is a huge number. However, a lot of those were incredibly short. So I've written down that I read about 21,000 pages by that point in the year. So that gives you an idea of sort of how much I have read. I'm very happy with that number. I never force myself to read, and I'm not stating that as a, how dare you not be reading as much as me? Absolutely not. I think that whatever anyone is reading is great. However much anyone is reading is great. I'm just super proud of myself that I've achieved that, and that has been something that I have continued to enjoy doing. And again, I do believe this question was from Books and Lala as well. How is your reading year going? And I would say fairly good. I think that most of the books that I read fall into the 3 to 5 star category, and I'm really allowing myself to just DNF or give up on a book that is not working for me if I don't think I'm going to enjoy it, just not to force my way through something. I think that I'm very willing to give a book a try, even if it's something I think I probably won't enjoy, if it's for a book club or just a recommendation. And there are so many books out there, so many books that I actively want to read. I don't want to be spending my time reading books that I'm not enjoying and forcing my way through them. So I'm very happy with that. So the first of the actual questions from this tag was favourite book of the year so far. So for this question, I picked Queer Little Nightmares. I don't know whether or not that was because it was fresh in my mind as something I had just read, but I really, really enjoyed this, and I have had a lot of 5 stars, so I really struggled to whittle it down to just one. So this one is an anthology of short stories all about horror, fantasy, in some cases sci-fi, and queerness, and either how that has played a part in terms of character representation, but also just about putting queer stories into other genres, or people who are othered being seen as monstrous. And I just think this had such incredible ideas. I think that often with anthologies, there are stories where they don't feel fully fleshed out. It felt very, like, it could feel very unfinished at the end of each story because the author isn't skilled in the art of creating a full narrative in a very short amount of time. But I didn't feel that with pretty much any of these stories. I thought they were fully formed on their own, were really interesting concepts, and were really well done. So yeah, that was definitely a fave. The next one I do have a copy of, so let me find that. It's alphabetized, why don't I just don't do that? Right. Okay, apparently this book is one of the only in this series that I don't own. However, the question is, what is your favourite sequel so far this year? And that is Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna Maguire. And this is part of the, I was about to say Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. That's by Ransom Riggs. This is part of the Every House Doorway series. They are a series of novellas, and I hope the series goes on forever. It's utterly fantastic. I've given every book in this series a 5-star rating. This year I decided to get caught up. There were a couple of books that had come out recently where I hadn't quite read all of them in the series. So in here we are following an institution, a boarding school type setting, where to the parents it is where children can go in order to move on from traumatic mental experiences that they've had, where in actual fact it is a it is a home for children who have gone through fantasy doors, fantasy portals, like for example in Alice in Wonderland, Narnia, etc. And they have for some reason ended up back in the real world and now can't cope. So this is sort of a refuge for them. Every other book in the series is set at this home, and every other book in the series is then set in one of these worlds, either when the child was first brought into that world, or for whatever reason they are able to go back. I don't know how, but she just manages to craft such wonderful complete stories in such a short amount of time. All of them have great representation, great commentary, and just are so inventive and brilliant. So Lost in the Moment and Found was the one that came out this year, and it just so fantastically brought together a lot of really difficult concepts. There was a lot of mention of child abuse in the first section, and I really loved the forward that Shona Maguire wrote to basically explain to readers that before anything truly dire occurs to the characters, the child runs away and that was just such a wonderful thing to be able to have in there. But it was so heart-wrenching to be looking at the point of view of this child in that situation, and the world that she goes to, where it's described as a place where all the lost things go, and her interactions there. I won't give much more about that story because I do think each of the stories is built to be a standalone story. I know that Across the Green Grass Fields was released as sort of an entryway to the series if the rest of them seemed like quite a daunting task to get caught up. However, I personally think the best experience you're going to have with this series is if you read it from the beginning to the end. And I had a really, really good time reading this and rereading the others in order to be prepared for that release. Question 3 is, what is your favourite reread? And for this one, I had to put Kill the Farm Boy, especially given by the time the halfway point of the year had happened, it was one of the very few books I had even reread, but also given the number of times I've reread it since, even in the couple of months since the halfway point of the year. So this book is a fantasy novel that pokes fun at fantasy tropes, and a lot of books in this sort of subgenre tend to be just for entertainment. They don't tend to actually be made to be all that serious. However, I think that this was a really interesting combination of making fun but also being serious in itself as a true fantasy novel. I don't think I'm explaining that very well, but essentially you follow a teenage boy who is designated as the chosen one by a pixie. He goes off to start his journey and immediately gets into an accident, and a bunch of the other characters have to go off on an adventure to try and fix the situation. And there's a queer romance in here that doesn't take over the plot. There are, like, each of the characters you get to see a lot of the point of view of, and each of them feel fully distinct, fully realised, and I just really, really loved it. And sorry, my dog is trying to get in, and I reread this a lot. It's really comforting, I find. So question 4 is new release that I need to read. So I think that this question is often more geared towards YouTubers who get sent books, especially advanced reader copies or ARCs, where because they are sent books before the release date, they have to keep on a schedule in terms of when they are picking up those books. I don't, and that's not me throwing any shade whatsoever on to people who do. Really, really good for them. I just pick up what I want to read, and if something is coming out that I really feel excited to read, I tend to put it on my Goodreads rather than buying it straight away. However, I have put a couple of answers to these questions, and that is that I've been picking up a lot of play versions of books, script versions of plays that I have seen either at the time of seeing them or fairly soon afterwards. So I should have these scripts with me, hang on. Okay, and that is these 3 plays. So we have My Sons Are Queer But What Can You Do by Robin Mage. We have Afterlife by Jack Thorne, and we have A Little Life, the book being by Hanya Yanagihara and the adaptation being also by Hanya Yanagihara, also Cohen Tachelet and Ivo van Hove. So all 3 of these, I think I've picked up a lot of plays over this year, and I think that it'd be good to get to them. So these 3 being quite recently released are the answer to my question. So this is another add-in question, again, I believe from Books and Lala, and that is, what genre are you reading the most of and more of this year? So I do believe that the genre of fiction, well, I read more fiction than non-fiction, but the most read genre, I believe, is fantasy and continues to be so. But I have been branching out, and I think that 2 sub-genres or subtypes of literature that I've been reading a lot more of recently has been gay historical fiction and poetry. So before, I thought I really didn't like poetry. I think especially because the examples of poetry that were given were the sorts of things that were incredibly highbrow, and also the things that you had to analyse in school, and the sorts of poetry that really didn't start to make sense until you'd had to have a discussion about it. Personally, I want to be able to read and grasp something the first time. I think that that's just the funnest reading experience that I have, and so being able to find more poetry that I think is both accessible but also beautifully written and really impactful, I think has been something really good for me this year. And with gay historical fiction, again, I think that historical fiction in general, not just LGBT kind, I think that has very much been sold to me as something incredibly dry. It is often pointed out as wartime fiction being I would guess the largest sort of subset of this, but I think that more and more recently there have been releases of queer historical fiction where, kind of like what Finlay Donovan has done for the cozy mystery genre with the focus on the hijinks and the characters, I think that's very much starting to become more of a thing in historical fiction and gay historical fiction. So that's something I've been reading a lot more of and really enjoying. So back to the numbered questions, we have, what is a book that made you happy? And I just had to put Good Morning, Good Night by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I just thought this was the most wholesome thing. It's a collection of things that he released on, or quotes or little messages that he would put on Twitter. The background of this is that he started posting something in the morning and at night to be things that he would like to hear have said to him, and they've provided a lot of wholesomeness and warmth to a lot of people, and they've been collected into this little book. I read the version, or I listened to the version that was narrated by himself, and it's just one of the most wholesome books, and I think it was just beautiful. It was really, really lovely to read. Question 6 is a book that made you sad/cry. I do believe that normally the question is a book that made you cry. However, I really don't very often actually cry with reading books, hence why I've changed it to sad. And I've got 2 answers for that. The first being Sadie by Courtney Summers. It received so much hype over the past couple of years on BookTube, and I decided to give it a go. And the book follows half of the time following Sadie, who is trying to track down the murderer of her sister, and half of the book is following a podcaster who has kind of been tasked with finding out where Sadie is and what actually happened. So first of all, I think that the hype is absolutely deserved. It's an incredible book, I think, that just does such a good job of commenting on the atrocities that are enacted against women in society. And also, I think it was a really interesting book, especially given the fact that because we are following both the perspectives of the podcaster and Sadie, we already know who did it because we are in Sadie's head. And because Sadie already knows who did it, she is very much existing in the present in her narration style. So, for example, we don't get to hear a lot of what her plans are into the future because she's so internally focused on what she is doing right now and the next step to get there. She also has a very pronounced speech impediment, which I think felt like a very natural part of the story and didn't feel just like tacked on just for an added layer of diversity. And this had such brilliant commentary as well on how people are tricked by manipulators and how someone that made me jump, how someone can come across in a certain way because they are manipulating others. The other one I've already talked about, and that is Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna Maguire, part of the Wayward Children's Every Heart a Doorway series. So this is the most recent book in that series, following our main character who runs away from an abusive household and finds herself in a place where the lost things end up. And I think this one, again, just the aching feeling that it provided in my heart because of the situation this girl was in and how reminiscent of so many other people that experience was like. That was very badly worded, but I just think it was such an impactful addition to this series, which I also already think is incredible. Question 7 is most anticipated book for the second half of the year that will be released in the second half of the year. So this is a question that I don't think I normally answer, just because of the fact that, again, if I'm keeping up with book releases, it's not so that I can purchase them and read them when they come out. It's so that they're on my radar and I get to them eventually. However, this is a series, again, of short novellas where I just think that every book has been fantastic so far. So the first one was The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Ni Vo. So we are following a main character, Chi, and they're a cleric and they are collecting stories. Although I do believe that I've found that Chi has become far more of an involved character as the series has gone on. I believe there are now 3 books out and Mammoth at the Gate is the 4th one that is coming out. So I just think that these feel like such classic fairy tales, despite the fact that they're coming out now. And I think that they are very reminiscent of the old style fairy tales where it isn't kind to the main characters and the tales that she is learning are supposed to either teach lessons, or each of them is just such a love letter to the art of storytelling. I think also each one has a different take-home message about storytelling. For example, one of them, there are 2 versions of the same story from different groups of peoples, and there is discussion about how the same story may be changed or reinterpreted based on the cultures that those stories exist in. Some of them focus on how would the characters who have become these legends or stories actually react to how they have been portrayed and how that story has warped what actually happened. Or like, I just think that it's such an interesting series of novellas and I'm really excited for the 4th book. Right, you're only allowed in here if you're going to be quiet. Okay, where were we? Right. Question 8, the biggest disappointment of the year. So for me, that was Lock and West by, I cannot remember. So I ended up landing on a 3-star for this book. And though that's not the worst rating in the world. I was going through this book expecting it to be a 5-star. I had very low expectations going in. The only thing that I'd really heard about it was that it had gay representation and also autistic representation. And from the cover, I just thought it was going to be quite a cutesy story, just a really easy read, and that definitely wasn't what I got out of it. So much of it had brilliant commentary on a whole range of issues. There are a lot of trigger warnings, I think, going into this book. So we're following a character who has an eating disorder, someone dealing with parental neglect and abuse, someone dealing with sexual abuse, and like there are so many aspects to this book that I think it did such a good job of incorporating in a way that felt really natural to these characters. And I thought the autistic representation was also really great. However, there was just one aspect where I just thought that it goes against the ways in which all of these other really hard topics were being handled, and I think just really frustrated me enough to knock it down from what was going to be a 5-star down to a 3. And if you don't want spoilers, then I'll just put myself in black and white while I'm talking about things that could potentially be seen as spoilery if you want to just skip. And so, yeah, with this book, throughout the book, the mother character of one of these boys is incredibly abusive, and in every other case where there's been an abusive party, the main character was really validated by people, and the commentary was the fact that, you know, this isn't your fault and it's your choice how to proceed, and you don't have to have that person in your life if you don't want to. Whereas with this character's mother, it was, she's mentally ill, so it's not her fault, and because she's family, you have to have her in her life, have her in your life because she didn't mean it. And I just thought that was such a slap in the face, and I really hated that about it, and it got me so annoyed. So yeah, hence why that is my most disappointing read of at least the year so far. Next, I have question 9, the biggest surprise. So this is a play that I read this year called Girls and Boys, and the reason why this was such a big surprise was not only because I hadn't heard anything about this play before starting, but was more because of the fact that I realised halfway through it is the same author as the worst book that I read, I believe 2 years running when I first started my channel, called DNA. I read that play once just because I found it in a charity shop, and secondly because me and my friends sometimes read through plays that have gotten bad reviews so that we can have some fun with them and sort of see if they really are that bad and just have a good time. And when I realised that, I was just like, how is this the same author? This play was just such a fantastic look at relationships and being a parent when you weren't expecting that from your life, and how you're trying to be the best parent but you think you're a terrible person, and like also the way that it is a one-person play, there are no other people, and how well time jumps occur, and you have conversations happening, one-sided conversations where you can really understand who else is in the room and who they're talking to. I just thought it was just so well done, and I think there is a twist in this, and once that happened, I did not see it coming, and I thought it was just handled so well. I just think it was so good, and I was really blown off my feet by it. How were they the same author, really? Question 10 is new favourite author. So for this question, I put down KJ Charles. There were quite a few authors that I've read multiple times and given a lot of very good ratings to, but I went with KJ Charles, 1, because I just love their work, but 2, because I've now read books from multiple different series and standalones, and never once had a bad time, whereas a lot of my other, who I still kind of consider favourite authors, most of what I have loved from their work has been from one book series. So they're one of these authors that do a lot of the queer historical fiction I was talking about before, where the focus is on the characters and the hijinks, and far more about that than being the traditional dry historical fiction based on war. And I like, something I really, really love about her books is the characters. And I think that I've now reread the Will Darling series, and I loved it so much. There's the Henchman of Zenda, which is a more gay retelling than the Prince of Zenda, or the Prisoner of Zenda, that's it. And I've read a few standalones. I just think that they're just such fantastic books. They have really distinct characters. They have such diverse character dynamics, and I think that all of the relationships that are set up as well are so complex, and just seeing these queer characters being placed in this historical setting, I really, really love it. Question 11 is new favourite characters, and I just have to put every character in Swordheart. So this, again, got a lot of hype, I think mostly last year, but I think it continues on BookTube, because cozy fantasy has been really making I was about to say comeback, but it's really coming to the forefront. I think that people are really in the mood for cozier titles and cozier versions of existing genres because of the craziness that is the world right now, which I can't fault people for. I too have been very much going into these genres. And Swordheart, I so wish this book would get a recover design. I just think this is ugly, but I read this and it was just such a wonderful, wonderful story. Now, the setup does not sound like it would be that cozy, but bear with me. So we are following a woman who husband died a while ago and has been serving as sort of a maid slash servant in the house of an older extended family relative. He dies, and much to the chagrin of the rest of, no, that's the wrong word. Chagrin means disappointment in a good, anyway. Much to the consternation of the other blood relatives, he has left everything to her, and in order to get their hands on this fortune, the family relatives have locked her in her own house. She can't leave, and they are trying to get her to marry her cousin in order for them to get the money. And she wants that money to go towards her nieces and nephews. She wants to provide secure futures for those family members, and so she decides that the only thing that she can do for them is to die. Much like that Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Anyway, and so she's looking around her room, trying to work out, right, how can I do this? And finds an old sword and thinks, right, people talk about like warriors falling on their swords. How hard can this be? So she unsheathes this sword in order to do away with herself, and a person pops out of the sword who then tells her that he is the guardian of the sword and now is sworn to protect her as the wielder of the sword. And just hijinks follow that. And just every character was such a delight to follow and so interesting and distinct. I found that the ways in which these two main characters suit each other and how they come to really respect the other in the skills that they have and the ways in which they use the little power in which they have, and the way that they learn to forgive themselves. And I just really, really loved it. I think that the journey was wonderful. The villainous characters in this family were just supremely hateable, and it was just such a good time from start to finish. And question 12 is the most beautiful cover. So I've kind of split this up, where the most beautiful cover of a book that I bought this year, let me grab it, is my copy of the books from the Bronte sisters. So in here we have Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey. I think they wanted to have one from each of the sisters, and I just love, so this is the Barnes & Noble leatherbound exclusive versions of these classics. So each of these is just such a stunning rendition. You have the foiled edges, you have the satin ribbon. Oh, this one's pink. I didn't even see that, but they're just so wonderful. And as special editions go, for me, I find that this is the most worth it. I think that these are far superior in aesthetics to, say, the Waterstones cloth-bound editions, and also because they tend to be far cheaper than a lot of other special editions of classics. Like, for example, this would have been £30. Most of the books in this collection are £30, whereas let's say I was going to Folio Society, I could easily be spending, or Juniper, I could easily be spending about £100 on a special edition. These are the most worth it to me, so I just really love these. And so they are Barnes & Noble, however, I do find the occasional copy in Waterstones and foils if you're in the UK. And I'm now getting quite a collection of them. I'll have to do some sort of tour of those things, either separately, or I need to do a bookshelf tour at some point, so I might have that included in that wider video. Oh yes, and in terms of the most beautiful covers of the books that I've read, I just think that the Every Heart a Doorway series has such wonderful covers. There's quite a number of them now, but this is the series as a whole, but just every one of these is just so stunning. We've got Every Heart a Doorway, Down Amongst the Sticks and Bones, Beneath the Sugar Sky, In an Absent Dream, Come Tumbling Down, Across the Green Cross Fields, Where the Drowned Girls Go, and Lost in the Moment and Found. And I just think that all of these are just beautiful. Oh, and also I know that there's some novellettas that go in between the series. Sometimes I think there's 2 or possibly 3. All of those have beautiful covers as well. Right, second to last question, we have a book that I really need to read by the end of the year. So I think that, I mean, I really need to read every book that I have on my TBR by the end of the year, but specifically I think that 2 sort of types of book or genre of book that I need to be focusing on are, 1, all of the books that were listed in my 5-star predictions video. I made that several years ago now, and I know I haven't read all of them, so I'd love to be able to do a follow-up of that video. Also, most of the books on that list were books that I already owned, so I really want to be getting to the books that I already own. And second of all, books that I bought pre-starting Goodreads. Now, that's not to say that that's like a marker, but it's more the fact that in every year since having my Goodreads account, I have kept track of all of the books I'm buying, but also all of the, like, how many books I've bought per year. And the fact that I still have a huge amount of books currently on my shelves unread that I have owned since starting my Goodreads account, I just think is ridiculous, and I really want to knock that down. I think when I started my YouTube channel, it was at something like 80, and that has steadily been going down, but I do want to, I mean, this would have been, what, 5-6 years ago now that I would have done that, so I would really like to knock that list down. And the final question, question 14, is newest book crush. And I never know how to answer this question because I don't find myself crushing on book characters. Often if I really love a character or love a relationship, it's because I love that relationship, not that I want that character for myself. And so I've adapted this question into newest book couple crush. So in terms of like a relationship that I really love. And here I also have 2 answers, one being the main couple from Swordheart and the other being Feyre and Rhysand from the A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, those 2 books. I just thought that it's incredible to get me on board with the idea of a love triangle in the first place, and the respect and equality in that relationship was just done so brilliantly. So that's my answer. And there you go. That is my very, very late mid-year book freakout tag. Again, none of these questions were answered with books that I've read from the second half of the year. And yeah, this is just for me to be able to look back. So I hope you enjoy it, but I will see you hopefully getting back on track in another video very soon. Bye.